back to Conduct Detrimental Podcasts. We're here with a breaking pod today. Some huge news out of our nation's capital. The U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to take on the New Jersey sports betting case for its next term. And this is huge news. We thought there was no chance. I thought there was no chance. Dan Wallach, you were the one out there saying that there's a chance, and you were right. What are you thinking?
Well, obviously, I played the middle perfectly. I wrote an article last week called 7 Reasons Why the Supreme Court May Take the New Jersey Sports Betting Case. And, of course, I hovered right around the middle. That I said it was pick 'em, 50%. But I think in my heart, and if you read the article, I kind of believed it. I believed that the timing of when the case came up for consideration in the last week of the court's term, and the court was so far behind last year's pace of cert grants that I thought there were some open slots to fill, more so than the usual. I thought that there might be as many as 5 to 10 cert grants during the last week's, court orders. And I thought for that reason, coupled with, the 5 or 6 other reasons I laid out, gave New Jersey a chance that many people didn't believe that it had, particularly since it has met defeat at every single turn. I mean, if New Jersey was a pitcher, it would have been sent down to single A a long time ago. It has lost every single court decision. I think it's like 0-6, but you only need one.
Yeah.
And the one at the Supreme Court trumps all.
Exactly. And this goes back to not only this case, but there was a Christie one before this, and they basically lost, kept appealing. The Supreme Court decided not to hear that case, brought another lawsuit, lost, appealed, and here we are. And obviously they haven't won on the merits. Sports betting is not legal in New Jersey yet, but for once they got what they asked for, and that is for the Supreme Court to hear the case. So, Dan, what happens next? What does this one-line ruling on the Supreme Court docket actually mean?
It puts PASPA directly in jeopardy, but we're a long way away from that happening. No decision on the merits from the Supreme Court will occur until the 2018 calendar year. I think the sweet spot for a ruling is probably between March of 2018 and then the end of next year's term, during the last week of June 2018. And the reason why is that we are now embarking on a new briefing schedule. All the petitions and all the court papers, throw them right in the circular file. We are going to begin with New Jersey being on the clock to file an opening brief on the merits. We have now transitioned from the cert stage to the merit stage. And I think I've laid out the timeline on Twitter. I looked up the Supreme Court rules, and I'm somewhat familiar with the practice. The opening brief is due on August 10th, and that's the immediate next date that's going to be relevant. August 10th, let me confirm this. My heart is pounding today, so I believe it's the 10th. And then a week later, we're going to see amicus briefs. And if you think we had a lot of amicus briefs filed at the cert stage, get ready for more groups to enter into the equation. We've already heard from the American Gaming Association, 5 states. We've heard from the Pacific Legal Institute and the American Gaming Association, and, of course, our colleague, Professor Ryan Rodenberg. Well, they're going to have to file new merit stage briefs addressing a wider array of issues. What caught the court's attention at the cert stage was the anti-commandeering principle under the 10th Amendment. But now that the case has crossed the divide into the merits, every issue in Christie 1, equal sovereignty, commerce clause, you name it, everything is potentially in play at the merit stage. And then, moving ahead, the leagues will, I think, have a brief due in September. That will be their response brief to New Jersey's opening brief, and then New Jersey gets 30 days to file a reply brief. And then what we're looking at, I think, is oral argument in before the 9 justices of the United States Supreme Court anywhere from between October and April. I know that's a vast window, but that's all the information we know at the current time. The case could be heard as soon as October, could be the middle of the month, but we know New Jersey sports betting will get its day in court in Washington, D.C., somewhere within that window, with a decision on the merits to come by June of 2018. Sorry, that took a while.
No, that's fine. I'm really fascinated, as you mentioned, sort of the whole array of issues are back back up for debate, and there's obviously some extremely high-profile lawyers on this case, and I'm really interested to see what they're really going to focus on, what arguments they're going to lead with, what they're really going to try to push down the justice's throat. And then in turn, as you said, we're going to get an oral argument. It's the justices sitting on the bench and the advocates up there. It's scheduled for an hour, I believe. And so we'll really get to see what the Supreme Court justices think are the most important issues back at them. Not only what the attorneys argued to them, but what they really think and what questions they're asking, what they're really going to nail down on. And that'll really preview what the strengths and the weaknesses of the current statute are, and the New Jersey's arguments are, and the sports league's arguments as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dan. We're not going to know what's important from the court's perspective until we're sitting in the courtroom, and you and I are both going to be there. I'm admitted to practice before the Supreme Court. I have the sheepskin on my wall. I've written petitions for writ. I've done amicus briefs, but I have never attended a U.S. Supreme Court oral argument, and this will be the first one. And I have a little bit of a word of warning for you. If you intend on going, and if any of our listeners want to go, it's the cheapest ticket in town. It's free, but you better get there by 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, the day of the argument, in order to get a seat. It's a small courtroom, and they reserve seats for the media. They reserve seats for I guess members of the bar. But getting back to your original question, the issue that I think could reemerge is what's known as the equal sovereignty doctrine, or the principle of equal sovereignty, and that focuses on the preferential treatment that PASPA confers on Nevada, and to varying degrees Oregon, Montana, and Delaware, in permitting those states to wade into the sports betting landscape because they had a pre-existing sports betting scheme, but excluding the other 46 states from offering or sanctioning sports gambling. And the reason to pass muster on the equal sovereignty, Congress would need to be able to demonstrate a sufficient basis for that differentiation. But the legislative history of PASPA makes pretty clear that the reason for differentiating between the 46 and the chosen 4 had purely to do with economic reasons, to protect the economic reliance interests of those states that had offered sports betting schemes before PASPA went into effect. And I don't think that that's a good enough reason. And the threshold question that the court will have to address here is, does the equal sovereignty principle apply to legislation enacted under the Commerce Clause? And if the answer to that question is yes, PASPA will be stricken down on at least that basis. And that's really a key question the court will have to address, in addition to all those that were raised in the SCOTUS petitions, which focused on the anti-commandeering principle.
So, Dan, you said a few minutes ago that no matter what, this case will see its day in the court. And I believe that's 99% true, but what you also talked to the CEO of William Hill this morning. You tweeted out that you spoke with Joe Asher.
Yeah.
And he said that this decision may get the wheels turning on federal regulation. What are the odds that happens before this case goes to oral argument? I mean, essentially it could moot this case, right? I mean, if they put a bill in, that would have to work really fast, but I think it's at least a possibility.
Well, I think you're looking at an outer window of June of 2018, so it gives the stakeholders a year to really ramp this up. I mean, think about it from the sports league's perspective. PASPA has always been wedge that the leagues have used to block sports gambling and then allow it only on their terms. You remove PASPA from the league's arsenal of weapons, what would happen would be the league's worst nightmare. It would mean that individual states can enact their own, legalization and regulatory regimes that could be vastly different across the country. And, that's referred to as a patchwork of different state laws. The leagues wish to avoid that. But they're playing with fire here. And if the leagues sit still and do nothing, they run the risk of losing any of the leverage that they have. And right now they have some leverage, but it's slipping away as we get closer to an oral argument. And this could represent a perfect opportunity for the leagues to get what they ultimately want in the long run, which is a federalized scheme, or I guess a comprehensive federal solution that mandates very specific safeguards, on issues of sport integrity, wagering integrity. You name all the benchmark issues that Adam Silver identified in his New York Times op-ed. This is a chance for the leagues to get what they want on a federal level, because otherwise, if they're not able to act now and get legislation across the finish line before June of 2018, if PASPA is overturned, it will become that much harder for the leagues to successfully introduce or back legislation if the states are opposed to it and if the casino industry is opposed to it. Right now, I think the casino industry would be willing potentially to play ball with the leagues if it meant legalized sports gambling by next year, even if there was a federal aspect to it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense now, I think, for the leagues to. We've already seen them sort of gradually change their course over time, but this really puts them under the microscope and puts sort of a deadline on things, which we haven't really seen yet. And as you said, I think the two things that they're really looking for are, first off, at least in the public, they're saying that they want to make sure that there's integrity of the game, there's no gambling issues among the players, the referees, and we've seen all those issues in pro sports come up in the past, but really, and this is getting off on a little bit of a tangent, but if we legalize it, it's actually easier to regulate and easier to monitor those issues. But
that's right.
That's their main concern from a, I wouldn't say safety, but from a integrity point of view. But secondly, they obviously want to figure out a way to add revenue for it. And I think if they suddenly PASPA's found unconstitutional, blown up, they really lose their leverage, as you mentioned, in finding a way to do both of those things, and it could kind of become the Wild West and
the Wild East, West, North, and South.
Exactly, state by state. So, I think we may see them start to act and start work together to move forward, but it would have to go quick because that would have to be a quick piece of legislation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Dan. But what's complicating, this great idea is the fact that the leagues do not speak with one unified voice at the moment. On one extreme, you have the National Football League totally opposed to sports gambling, legal sports gambling, and the same thing with the NCAA. You have the NBA, which has been the progressive sort of leader on the issue. So at the present time, unless the leagues are, communicating behind the scenes, which I would imagine is happening, at least publicly, there seems to be a fracture within at least the league base on what the best approach, if any, is. And certainly to kind of meet in the middle, on the one extreme, you have the casino industry that believes that issues of regulation should be best left to the states. And on the other side of the coin, you have the NBA, which wants to have a federal solution. There's a lot of ground to make up in just a few months, particularly as we're approaching a summer, a time that, typically is, vacation time. Maybe Congress isn't in session. It's going to be a very steep climb to get federal legislation over the hump before the Supreme Court potentially moots PASPA.
Yeah. What do you make of both the NHL and NFL moving franchises to Las Vegas? I mean, do you think that even if they're coming out with the talking points still that I'm talking about the NFL here, against the legalization, but I mean, actions speak louder than words. Do you think that signals them softening to the issue?
Yeah, I think Gary and Roger both speak with forked tongue in opposing legal sports betting when they're moving franchises to a jurisdiction that has a successful and robust regulatory scheme for sports betting. So this issue can emerge even at the Supreme Court level because the issue of the hypocrisy of the leagues in how they've dealt with sports gambling vis-a-vis fantasy sports has never received a proper airing in a judicial forum. The Third Circuit skirted that issue. The district court didn't deal with it. And it does raise the issue of not just simply hypocrisy, but how the leagues might be selectively enforcing PASPA for their own economic benefit in providing a bubble wrap around daily fantasy sports, yet using PASPA to block sports betting. So how the leagues are acting with respect to issues such as movement of franchises in Las Vegas, the deals to sell their data to sports betting operators, I think this can emerge in a subtle way before the Supreme Court. Certainly it's going to be raised in the papers, and that might be an issue that provides some context for everything. So yeah, I think if I were the NFL and the NBA and the NHL right now, I'd be reaching across the ideological spectrum and accelerating conversations with my counterparts in the gaming industry and with members of Congress to try to get this done. There's so much downside here for the sports leagues that if they lose the leverage and lose the ability to control the dialogue and to have a federal system, once it's gone, it may be gone for a very, very long time.
Exactly. And my hope is, and my thought is, that the SCOTUS justices won't be skirting that issue at all, because it would be a fascinating one to have come up during the argument and during the briefing and everything else. All right, well, we just wanted to come to you guys with a quick update on this issue, as there's a lot of details emerging, so keep an eye out. We'll be all over them. Dan, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be the sports law case of 2000. It was a sports law case of my career to follow, but I think now the New Jersey sports betting case will be of such prominence and will dominate the conversation in sports legal circles. This has the potential to be so transformative for not only for the gaming industry, but for the sports industry. Think about how it would change how games are watched, how games are consumed. What we're looking at potentially is legal betting on professional sporting events pretty much all over the country as early as the 2018 season, NFL season, if not even earlier. So this will basically take the United States out of the dark ages of sports wagering, and what is taking place in Europe, the in-play wagering, mobile devices in the arenas. I think we're about to head into an environment, and we're about to enter a new age here, which is so exciting. And this could be the last piece of the puzzle. You remove PASPA as a block, I think you're going to see an accelerated pace of states beginning to legalize sports betting. And instead of being 3 to 5 years away, we could be looking at 1 year to 18 months away.
Exactly. I think you nailed it with the timeline shift there. And even if SCOTUS ultimately says no, I guess we're back at square one. But I think this is going to put the pressure on the sides, as we discussed, to kind of get the ball rolling on potential legislation. So no matter what, I think this moves up the timeline either way.
Yeah, and Dan, even in a loss, I don't think this ends the controversy. Well, it could end the controversy forever if the Supreme Court rules that PASPA is constitutional. But I think there could also be an opportunity here for other states to jump on the bandwagon, not just simply with an amicus brief, but to actually try to push the issue. I guess the conventional approach here is just to kind of wait and see. But if I were advising a state lawmaker, I would recommend, if I were advising the legislature of all the 46 states that don't have sports gambling, I would urge them to introduce bills and to pass laws that would legalize sports betting tied to the removal of PASPA, so that they're ready to go on day one once the Supreme Court, if and when the Supreme Court overturns PASPA, that these other states won't have to face a lengthy delay before they ramp up their operations. So it would be incumbent on so many other states to get their bills, ready and in the pipeline for this inevitability. Yeah,
we've seen that to a certain extent already, have we not? Yeah, so we have. There's a few states that have already been working on that. And with that, thanks for tuning in. We got to run, but happy to have some fun news to report and talk about, and it's going to be a fun next 12 months or so as this thing works through SCOTUS.
We should do a live podcast right outside the Supreme Court building, whenever the argument takes place. So we should take conduct detrimental to Washington.
Done and done.
All right.
Thanks,
Looking
guys.
forward to it, Dan. Thanks again, everybody. And Dan, I will talk to you soon.